I just bought this abandoned Mazda RX-7, which has been sitting undriven for over a decade.
And well, that means it's got some issues.
It's firing. I saw something fly off the car. It's overheating again. Oh.
But I think I can bring this car back to life and make it drive better than it did when it was new.
And make it reliable, which probably has some of you laughing right now. Why?
Well, because rotaries have a certain reputation. A reputation for being the most unreliable cars to come out of Japan. A reputation that stopped me from owning one, even though the RX-7 is one of my all-time favorite cars. But you know what? You're wrong. I say that the unreliability of the rotary engine was not because of the engine itself, but because people have a fundamental misunderstanding of how the rotary works. And I'm gonna prove it too, with this thing. Now, it's a little rough around the edges, but this is a one-owner, fully factory original car, and it was serviced at the Mazda dealership since it was new, which I would later find out wasn't necessarily a good thing. But even with all that, it's still one of my all-time favorite cars. One that I've been searching for over 6 years now. You see, RX-7s are not that common in the US. If you jump on the internet and look for one right now, there just aren't very many for sale. And that makes sense. Mazda only sold the FD in the US for 3 years with a total of less than 14,000 cars. Compare that to its little brother, the Miata, which sold 63,000 cars in the same years. All that means FDs are hard to find. So naturally, I had to search every corner of the internet, which is a huge pain in the butt if you're manually going to every single used car website or jumping from city to city on Facebook Marketplace. Of course, you could just use Auto Tempest, which searches all of those places for you automatically. So I punched in my ideal RX-7, and a couple of pretty solid ones showed up, like this black 93 on eBay or this 94 blue on AutoTrader. Wait a minute, that's not a rotary. Moving past the sacrilege, after a bit more searching, Auto Tempest found me an eBay auction for an amazing car. 1994, Montego Blue, manual, not a slick top, but the even more rare glass sunroof touring model. And perhaps best of all, being sold by the original owner in Florida with a stack of maintenance records. And it had been sitting mostly undriven for nearly a decade, so it had just enough issues that I got a screaming good deal. Of course, I'm not gonna gatekeep, so you can find the Auto Tempest link in the description. There you can find anything from the most pristine showroom examples of cars all the way to abandoned projects like this one. Thank you to Auto Tempest for sponsoring this episode and always supporting car enthusiasts. So we bought my dream RX-7 in Florida, got it running all right, and drove it a few thousand miles back home to Texas. And everything was fine. Until, of course, the car started idling rough, misfiring, not making boost, overheating in the Texas heat, and then finally, the clutch failed. Turns out a well-maintained RX-7 is still an RX-7. So let's get this car to Albon HQ and start ripping it apart. The first thing to attack is the clutch. The clutch slave cylinders in these RX-7s are notorious for failing, and it's a relatively easy job to knock out, or at least so I thought.
What did I do?
Without a working clutch, this car is a complete paperweight. So I unbolted the clutch slave cylinder and took a closer look.
This is called a clutch slave cylinder, and the way it works is pretty simple. Just like your brakes, you push a pedal, it pushes brake fluid through a tube, through a cylinder. What it does is it actually pushes against a clutch fork that lives inside your transmission, and that actuates your clutch. RX-7s, FD-RX-7s are notorious for these things going bad, and as you can see, for these things ripping. For its replacement, we have a stainless steel line that will take care of this, and a brand new OEM one of these.
So in goes the new clutch slave cylinder and new clutch line, and now, just like with your brakes, we have to bleed the clutch.
All right, with the clutch line installed, it is time for us to bleed the clutch. Why don't you jump in? If you push that clutch there, does it come back?
Does not.
Okay, so this will be the challenge. We kind of have to keep pumping the clutch. Bring it back if you can grab it. There you go. And just keep pumping it.
As Pickle pumped the pedal, the pressure started coming back. But I noticed the fluid level in the reservoir was dropping way too fast.
You know, I should probably check if it's all just spilling out on the ground, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's where it's going. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no.
there was a lot of fluid on the ground.
What did I do?
I swear, this car, the only thing it likes to do is leak. Doesn't like to run, doesn't like to stay cool, doesn't like to give me good fuel economy, just leak.
At first, I thought I just left a line loose, but after inspecting everything and having Pickle pump the clutch while I was under the car, I realized it was a much worse mistake.
It's leaking from inside the transmission. So I did tighten all the lines, but I probably didn't put in the little dingus that comes out of the clutch slave. I didn't actually put it onto the clutch fork. I probably just missed. That thing just shot out.
Oh no.
And then it's just pissing fluid straight out the big hole.
The arm that sticks out of the clutch slave cylinder was gone, which meant that when I installed it, I must have somehow put it in at an angle and totally missed the clutch fork. And when Pickle pressed the clutch, that little arm was launched out of the slave cylinder and into the bell housing of the transmission, which meant that if we needed to get it out, we would have to remove the entire transmission from the car. Dang it.
All I wanted was a working clutch. I just wanted to roll gears and such. Check the lines 10 times before, but all my fluid dripped on the floor. I gave it the perfect torque. I just missed the fork.
Thankfully though, many manual transmissions have what's called an inspection hole. And when I reached inside that hole,
Look! I got it!
I got so lucky that this tiny little arm decided to land at the bottom of the bell housing and not jammed up somewhere above the clutch fork. So we reassembled the slave cylinder, bolted it back in, this time making sure that it went in straight, hooked the lines back up, and tried bleeding it again. And well, the operation was successful. We now had a working clutch, and that meant we are now one step closer to having a working RX-7. The next failure to remedy was the power steering system. Both power steering lines were leaking, and everywhere I parked looked like a crime scene thanks to the puddle of red fluid it left behind. Now, many people might consider this an easy job, but those people haven't worked on an RX-7.
Okay, so now we're on phase 2. We're on phase sub 2 of phase 1. 1.2a. Typically every 3 days I start the car up and it goes because the power steering pump has no fluid lid, and that's exactly what it sounds like.
The lines on the top are easy to reach, but the lines on the bottom are designed for Mr. Fantastic. Thankfully, we had Zan, who struggled, bled, dare I say, even wept, but eventually got the lines out.
Got it.
Like a damn surgeon.
The new lines went in, and that's power steering fixed.
Clutch slave. Check. Power steering leak. Now, check. Oil leak. Next. Rat's nest.
It's time to go hunting for some mice, baby.
Now, before we start tearing the motor apart, I think it's important I explain what the heck the rat's nest even is. You see, the RX-7 was released in 1992, but it started development in the late 80s. The previous RX-7 was hugely popular worldwide, and the hotted up Turbo 2 version of the FC was the RX-7 that walked so the FD could run. But going into the 90s, Mazda wanted to keep up with the high-tech boffinry of their Toyota and Mitsubishi counterparts, so they contracted Hitachi, yes, the company that made CD drives and other stuff, to develop a twin turbo system that would have all of the power but with none of the lag, more or less. What they came up with was this: a multi-stage vacuum solenoid controlled sequential twin turbo system that honestly would make any modern engineer soil themselves thanks to the sheer level of complexity. But here's the thing: it worked. The 1.3 liter rotary was responsive, and surprise, surprise, it made torque, something that most rotaries don't do. Which brings us to the rat's nest, an ultra complex series of solenoids and vacuum lines that lives under the intake manifold of the 13V engine, which is responsible for ensuring that those sequential twin turbos make the right amount of boost at the right time. Because the wrong amount of boost at the wrong time can end very badly. Technology has since come a long way, and companies are making big single turbos that will outspool and outboost even the best and most complex twin turbo systems of the 90s. Also, time is generally not kind to complex things, especially when they're under the hood of a lightweight Japanese sports car. So let's fix it. But of course, before we could get around to fixing the rat's nest, we needed to remove it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, jeez.
Snapped right off.
Oh, no.
This is supposed to be a soft rubber hose. Look. So I'm gonna try a trick. Now, I don't know if this trick works. I've seen it on the internet. These really old busted vacuum hoses that are, no longer malleable. If you hit it with a little bit of fire, I've heard it'll melt and soften them up enough that you can get them off without destroying the nipple like I just did. Now, I don't know if this is actually the case, but we're about to find out.
I should say, mostly for legal reasons, don't do this near fuel or anything combustible. But it most certainly did work and got us right on top of the unholy rat's nest.
Talk about a rat's nest, huh? Actual rats have been in here. Look at this, nibbling on acorns.
Wow.
See?
Well, they say food is a good sign, actually. That means they're not nibbling on your wires, they're eating. If there is no food and they're in there, they're chewing on your wires.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't feel particularly lucky at this moment, but I see what you're saying. Come here. Come here real close. Look down here. Look at this. With literal rats living in here at some point. This is the rat's nest. This is the most obscene, complex, downright vomit-inducing series of freaking vacuum hoses that I've ever seen in my entire life. And here's the best part. They're all hard as a rock. Every last one, well, that one's actually not bad, but every single last one of them just breaks off and is completely and utterly useless. Right.
Of course, it didn't get any easier.
No way. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
And at one point, I had to resort to some drastic solutions. But eventually, we got it out.
Finally. Oh, God. Now we can finally see the rotary engine. It's not that big. Starts here, ends there. It's pretty small, actually.
Removing the rat's nest was a huge step forward, and it also meant that we could now get to the fuel rails. The fuel rail needed something simple, a new fuel pulsation damper, a small little part that lives at the end of the fuel rail and keeps the fuel flow in the rails smooth. It's known to leak and cause fires, so it was a no-brainer to pull the fuel rails now and just replace it. But this little piece of preventative maintenance was gonna bite me in the butt. We'll get to that later, though. First, we began dissecting the vacuum system on the rat's nest. Now, you might think that replacing rubber vacuum lines is easy. Well, does this look easy? Every line required us to use heat to soften it, then a blade to carefully cut it open, and a pick to gently pry it off the line that it was attached to, taking great care not to bend or break any of these hard line connections. Now, the next question in your head is probably, why even bother? Well, let me explain.
So the reason we're messing around with all of these things and going through the headache that is these vacuum lines is because this car uses a sequential twin turbo system. And that means that it has two turbos. One comes online first, so one turbo starts spinning, and then somewhere in the middle of the range, in this car it's between 4,000 and 5,000 RPM, exhaust pressure is then diverted to both turbos rather than just one. The way that works is this. By using a complex series of solenoids, vacuum solenoids, that when the computer says open this, it sends air to a particular valve, and then that valve opens, and then that opens a flap somewhere. This is how in the 1980s and 90s electronic things were controlled. That's the reason why we have to go through this mess. And if we want this car to drive like how it would drive in 1994 when it rolled off the showroom lot, we need to replace all of these things, even though it's bankrupting me.
And that doesn't even factor in the air pump diverter system, the exhaust gas recirculation system. This car was pretty high tech for the 90s, and right now, I'm really wishing it wasn't. It required a level of patience that three baboons like us had to dig deep to find. Of course, while we were in there, famous last words, we decided to change the spark plug wires and fix a couple oil leaks. Both the oil filler neck and oil filter housing used O-rings to seal, and well, like most things in this engine, they were mummified.
No more oil leaks.
Well, on this side of the engine. With that taken care of, we moved on to replacing the rat's nest vacuum lines with new silicone ones, replacing all the solenoids with fresh OEM Mazda ones, and swapping in some new one-way check valves because we broke nearly all of them during removal. All of which was beautifully rendered on the giant laminated posters I made of the factory vacuum diagram.
Shawty says I suck, so I brought her a vacuum diagram. So I went and printed 11 by 17 laminated the entire vacuum diagram for the car. So we need to take this and turn it into this, which I'll be honest, doesn't seem like it's a strong possibility.
Doesn't seem like it's strong.
And after days of working our little fingers to the bone, we got the new and improved rat's nest in and crossed it off the list. And along with it, took care of the biggest source of complexity in the entire car, which meant it was time to move on to the next fatal flaw, cooling. And contrary to what you might think with cooling, we started at the exhaust.
Oh, look at this freaking thing. This is the stock factory FD downpipe. And look, it's a 90-degree bend right off the top into this giant catalytic converter. This is the reason why there was so much heat in the engine bay, because of this giant restriction. And that's the reason why all of those vacuum lines and the wiring harness have just dried and cracked into basically dust. So this is going
in the bin.
in its place, of course. 3.5-inch downpipe, I think, and smooth transition. No catalytic converter. So not only is this gonna free up a whole lot of horsepower, but it's also gonna keep temperatures down in the engine bay and hopefully keep me from cooking another wiring harness.
Now, remember when I did this? Well, it kinda did this. My ham-fisted impacting absolutely tore up the threads on the factory mid-pipe. I tried my best to extract the studs with the tools I have, but I failed.
Now, there comes a time in every man's life where he must make the decision between doing work that's important and putting on a loud exhaust. Do you know what my decision is?
Let's go.
Exhaust time!
Do you agree?
I couldn't get the studs out. Now I bought a stud remover kit, but for the price of the stud removal tool, or a little bit more, $20 more than that, I bought an entire 3-inch mid-pipe off of a guy whose FD blew up. Now I know that's kind of the opposite of the thesis to this, but our FD's not going to blow up. As you can see, 3-inch mid-pipe straight through, no catalytic converters. It's got these nice thick flanges on it. It's a nice piece, and it's got a fiberglass heat wrap on it, so my legs won't catch fire because the trans tunnel gets too hot. Now here's the thing. This thing's been sitting in storage for like 10 years, so we are just going to take a nice level sand block to these guys. What do you call these? Flanges? We're gonna level out these flanges, and then it should have a good mating surface for when we put the exhaust in.
So I went to work on getting the new mid-pipe ready for install, and Zane and Pickle had the task of removing the original one.
This downpipe. This is the catted downpipe, which we will be removing. What?
Mid-pipe.
Mid-pipe. Excuse me.
You want to redo it?
Oh yeah. Boom goes the dynamite. Oh. Isn't there supposed to be a straw on this? Oh yeah, that's a good stream right there. Takes me back to high school.
You want me to hold it?
Oh, my neck.
I finished my mid-pipe thing. Did you guys finish yours?
Yep. Just tightening it, you know, just to keep the challenge up.
Okay.
The bolts holding it in were torqued by Antonio Inoki himself. But thankfully, modern technology prevails once
Do it now,
again.
maybe. All right, this portion of the removal is sponsored by Milwaukee. No problem. Give me a real challenge. before, Jack, or you just happy to see me?
Connected to the mid-pipe is a line from the air pump. It actually forces air into the factory catalytic converter to get it to run a little bit cleaner, more 90s emissions goofiness.
All right, let's drop this baby. Fast.
Wow, between this and that cat, between these two cats, we're probably reducing like 50 pounds
Yeah.
at least. All right, Zane, don't get too comfortable coming out. We got another pipe going in.
With the original mid-pipe out, in goes the new one, which went about as smooth as I would expect, considering it was nearly 4 in the morning at this point.
Check my pelvic muscles here.
Oh.
Just like they showed you in boarding school.
Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme. Hey, come on up. It's mid-pipe time.
But eventually, we got it bolted up. And then finally, we could install the new downpipe. We were firing on all cylinders, or rotors, with each of us doing our designated tasks.
Hey, what do you?
And everything was going fine until
Oh, fudge cakes. Dude, this transmission bolt is loose. Holy moly. Y'all, this transmission bolt is loose. Oh my god, look at this. This car was serviced only by Mazda. Those guys are a bunch of hacks. Holy moly.
the squeaky clean history of this car was slowly crumbling before my eyes.
I gotta check everything now. Also, why was the transmission off? You think it had a clutch?
But it didn't matter, because we were going to be the ones that righted the wrongs done to this poor little Mazda over the years. And with the exhaust done, we moved on to the next component of cooling, the under tray. Now, this might not seem like an important piece, it's just a piece of plastic. But in an FD RX-7, the radiator is configured in a type of V-mount setup. This means that the radiator is angled facing down, rather than the straight up and down that most normal cars have. And without an under tray directing the airflow through the radiator effectively gets less airflow the faster you drive, because the air follows the path of least resistance, which is under the car. That's why this car would constantly overheat even when I was driving at 60 or 70 miles per hour. So back on the factory under tray went. Now, eventually, I will be replacing the radiator and the tiny factory intercooler to make sure that this car runs as cool as it can, but you'll have to subscribe and stick around for that. Today, we're bringing this car back to its 90s glory, and so I slapped the intake manifold back on, the airbox and piping, the alternator, and then finally, it was time to start up the car to see if we succeeded.
All right, everything is back together. The car is looking OEM-ish. Let's start it and see if it runs. Damn it.
The car sounded rough at first, but it was probably just a few major vacuum leaks. But the important thing is, it's running. The car is finally back to 100%, or so I thought. While I was celebrating, I noticed smoke. At first, I just brushed it off. We had a fully catless rotary now, so I figured it must have just been running rich or something.
God, my eyes are burning.
But as I got the car ready to roll out of the shop and go for a test drive, the RX-7 kept getting smokier and smokier. Eventually, the garage was so full of smoke that my eyes were tearing up and I couldn't breathe. So I rolled the car out and just let it idle outside. Something wasn't right. The car just wasn't idling well. And then it stalled out and refused to start again. My heart sank. Was this low compression? Was my little rotary engine blown? The whole point of buying this car was to prove that the rotary could be reliable, and here I was having done all the things that you're supposed to, and it was dead. But the car was starting and driving fine, more or less, before we took it all apart. So maybe it was something I did, something less serious, hopefully. So I called Richard, who is our resident RX-7 expert, and he said it didn't look like bad compression, it looked like a flooded engine.
Okay, so RX-7s have a built-in deflooding procedure, which is to basically just hold the gas pedal down to the floor and try to start it. So let's try that.
I tried starting it, and then I tried again, and eventually it got going. It's not happy. Honestly, judging from how it doesn't want to run and how much smoke is coming out the exhaust, I think we might have a leaky fuel injector. A leaky or stuck open injector would explain the symptoms. Running rough, flooded engine, and enough smoke out the exhaust to fumigate a city block. To verify this, I decided to go on a little drive and, well... Oh, it's breaking up. Oh, nothing. 10% throttle. Oh, you hear it? Oh, okay. We're going back home, guys. Oh, God. So I drove back to the garage and started taking everything apart. Here we go again. Everything that we had spent the last few weeks doing had to get removed so we could get to the fuel rails buried underneath. Here's the fuel rail. Here are two of your injectors. These are the primaries. Here are the other two injectors. There's one here and there's one here. These are your secondaries. How do you tell if they're bad or not? Let's try to get them out of the rail. To be honest, other than some cracked pintle tips, there wasn't exactly anything obvious wrong with them. But after some forum investigation, I found out that it was pretty common for these injectors to get stuck open if they had been sitting outside for an extended period of time, especially if they were in high humidity like perhaps the kind that our evaporative cooler puts out. So I boxed up the injectors and sent them out to get cleaned and flow tested. About a week later, these bad boys showed up at my door, fully refurbished with new O-rings and pintle caps. So I smashed them into the fuel rails, got them back into the car, well, after stealing some parts from my other project, the VTEC Mini Cooper, and then I thought maybe I should change the spark plug since the engine was flooding after all, which was a good idea, and now the car was ready. Let's start it. Ready?
The battery's dead.
Buy an RX-7, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Stupid car. After ample lollygaggery, sitting at reasonable voltage, I don't know if it's enough. And just like that, the FD was alive again. But was it even running better? Well, it wasn't running great. Definitely idling weird. But the proof is in the test drive. All right, we are test driving, my friends. As you guys can see, the idle's a little lumpy. I don't know what the heck's up with that. The idle may have been lumpy, but the boost most certainly was not. Very good. Holy smokes! Okay, I think it's pretty safe to say this car is not making 255 horsepower. Jeez. With the new fully catless exhaust, the boost was hitting hard, and the car was feeling better than it ever had. And then I went for one more pull. That was weird. So this time, when I hit 4,500 RPM and the second turbo was supposed to come on, it didn't. All of a sudden, the second turbo was no longer spooling up. So I tried again, and again, and again, but the car kept driving like doo-doo. Dang it. I got one good pull. One good pull where it was fast as absolute heck. It seems like no matter how much stuff I fix with this car, it always has something else wrong with it. The car was also getting hot, despite my under tray theory, and so I had to bring it back to HQ. All right, so good news is that the car drove really well for about 10 minutes. It boosted beautifully. It was making power, man. It felt fast. And then it heat soaked a little bit. Second turbo just completely stopped coming online, and then the car just completely bogged down. I think it went into some sort of limp mode or something. We have a bunch of very nice aftermarket goodies that'll probably fix these problems, but you're gonna have to subscribe and stick around for the second episode of the FD build where we finally properly get it on the road and make some jam. If you want more updates on the car, you can join us at the Albon Discord, which is linked in the description, where I'll be posting about everything we're doing in real time. And hit the link to Auto Tempest in the description to see all the RX-7s for sale in the US. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.